Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me back again and haven't overstayed my welcome, and thank you for putting up with me another Sunday. And my son may have passed around once again one of those little white sheets of paper. Again, it's not a test. It's just a note sheet. If you like a little fill in the blank and you want to take notes. And of course, I always encourage that on the back, if you want to, if there's questions that come up while we're studying together or thoughts that you have, to write those down so you don't forget about them, and then you'll have them for later to ask or to look over and ponder. But last week I shared, just a little bit, that I own a lot of Christmas songs, numbering over 1,000. I think it's pushing about 1,300 these days that I have. And but it's not that just I own a lot of Christmas songs. It comes from a very deep love of Christmas itself, because as a child, one of my favorite Christmas films was a film called Ernest Saves Christmas that came out in 1988, and there's a picture of it here, in which the lovable Ernest P. Worrell says this. Did you have a picture of it on the slides? There you go, in case you recognize it or not. He says, I don't tell many people this, but Christmas is just about my favorite time of the year. Ever since I was a little kid, I always felt like it was my own personal holiday. And that's how I feel about when Christmas comes into the year. I come in it with all kinds of excitement, ready to start putting up the tree October 1st, and have to hold myself off and keep the Christmas music back just a little bit longer. But I love history, and I love traditions. I love Christmas movies, and Christmas movies are also a little bit of my hobby. You see, when I was getting ready this morning, I had to decide if I was going to wear this black suit jacket, or I also own a Santa suit, which I could have put that on this morning. It's quite warm as well. But I own hundreds of Christmas films. No kidding. And I've read Dickens' A Christmas Carol more times than I have fingers and toes, which is my favorite book. And I've seen every version of Christmas Carol that I think has come out. I've seen the classic version that's now shown on TV quite often, which is the 1984 starring George C. Scott. I have the black and white versions, and I have animated versions, and of course the Muppet Christmas Carol, which has become probably more popular than the 1984 version now. But I even own a copy of the stage production of a Klingon Christmas Carol, spoken all in the Klingon language from Star Trek. Which, when I was quite younger, about 13, 14 years old, I had spent a considerable amount of time trying to learn the Klingon language and speak it myself. And there's a brief picture of that as well up here. And so you can see that it does exist, and I'm not making it up. There it is. So, now alongside my hobby of Christmas films, as I've mentioned, and those Christmas songs, is each week I told you I would share with you a very unusual Christmas song. Something that you can put in your pocket, that you can share with your friends. And last week I shared one that was actually created around the movie Star Wars that came out in 1980. And today's is much newer, but it's called Chiron Beta Prime, which is a very funny name for a Christmas song. And it's also science fiction themed. And it's about a family who gets kidnapped during a robot uprising and is on a moon base at Christmas and writing home to their friends saying, please come and visit us. The robots are allowing them to celebrate Christmas, but their hope is fading. Come as soon as possible and please rescue us, because it's quite terrible in the robot uprising. So with that new Christmas song in your pocket, we journey deeper into the heart of Christmas together. Well, I started wondering a few years back, when I was collecting Christmas music, what was the oldest Christmas carol around? And I began to kind of do some research and look it up. And when I was collecting ancient carols, there's many, of course, that are not really sung much anymore, and even rarely more that are unknown. So when we think of old carols, we might think of a song like the Boar's Head Carol. Does anybody recognize that one? It's not used too often, but sometimes the instrumental, the boar's head and hand bear I. And we recognize sometimes the instrumental is used in commercials or in backgrounds. But it's only about 500 years old, which is quite old, of course. But the oldest carol that I think we have is actually from the 300s. Think about how old that is. It's called Jesus, Light of All Nations. And as far as I know, it's certainly not played on the radio anymore alongside the song Last Christmas. But there is a very old Christmas carol that you probably do know, and we do still sing. In fact, we sang it this morning. The bonus is that the words of this Christmas carol are about 1,200 years old. For 1,200 years, we've continued to stand alongside our ancient brothers and sisters in Christ and say these words. And the song today is known as O Come, Emmanuel. And so a couple slides ahead, in the 8th or 9th century, one more, the Latin words of what would become this song were used in monasteries leading up to Christmas. And they were called the O antiphons. And for reference, this would be around where some of the ancient abbeys in the UK were being built, around this time frame. Each day, one line would be recited for 7 days until Christmas. And the final line was recited alongside Mary's song from Luke chapter 1. Now, the words didn't actually appear in song form till the 1700s, and then the song we recognize didn't come about till about the 1800s when it was translated into English. But the roots are very old. And what's unique and awesome about this song, and it's a little bit fun because there's a lot of little fun Easter eggs sometimes hidden in, is that when you have a sharp eye, the basis of this song is that each line describes a title of who this Messiah was going to be, Jesus. O come, Emmanuel. O come, O Dayspring. But when you look at the song in Latin and then flip each title upside down and look at them from the end, it creates an acrostic, meaning tomorrow I will be here. It was a song written about hope, embedded with hope, and it was a song about who Jesus was going to be and who Jesus was to us. So we're entering today into the season of Advent. And if you didn't know, Advent is a very traditional time of waiting as we count down the days till Christmas. But it is, of course, much more than just a little cardboard thing full of chocolates. It means the coming. It's about preparing of ourself for a very specific purpose. A time of looking at our hearts and asking, are we prepared today to receive who Jesus truly is in our life? Or are there still places in our life that are keeping him out? Do we have room for him in our life? So the first Sunday of Advent traditionally focuses upon the word hope, which will be our topic of discussion this morning. But why is hope so important? That it gets its own day, and you might say the Christian calendar. Because hope is a core need for human beings. Just like the essential of faith that we talked about last week, hope is just as essential, and it's the second of the three invaluable Christian virtues, which are faith, hope, what's the last one? Love, or the ancient word charity that we read about in 1 Corinthians 3:13. So love is usually what we focus upon during the final Sunday before Christmas. So what can we say about hope this morning? Hope is a central theme, and it's a central theme in many, many Christmas carols. Like one of my favorites, Come thou long expected Jesus, born to set thy people free. From our fears and sins release us, let us find our rest in thee. Israel's strength and consolation, hope of all the earth thou art. Dear desire of every nation, joy of every longing heart. But hope, even though we look at it and we sing about it at Christmas time as a good thing, that's not particularly the way the ancient world looked at hope in the days of Jesus, in the days prior. Hope was not considered such a good thing. And in fact, it was just the opposite. So going back to the ancient world to really understand the way the ancient world understood when they heard the word hope, one of the best examples we have is in the ancient mythology of Greece. in the story of Pandora. As the story goes, Epimetheus and Prometheus, these old ancient mythological Greek gods, were given authority over mankind by Zeus. Epimetheus was given charge to distribute all of the traits and gifts to all of the animals upon the earth. So he gave things like the ability to see at night, super hearing and super smell and so on. But as he came to man, he realized he had run out of gifts and traits to give mankind. So he decided to steal fire from Zeus. Fire was believed in the ancient Greek world to separate man from the gods. And with fire, man could do things like keep animals at bay, cook food, forge weapons, cook food, make tools. And Zeus was angry and decided to take it out on mankind for accepting fire, and especially on Epimetheus' brother Prometheus. He did so by cursing his brother Epimetheus in the worst way that was considered to be possible by Zeus. This is not me speaking. This is ancient Greek mythology. Okay, so don't blame me afterwards. But he did so by giving him a wife. And they also gave him a wedding gift, a jar. Sometimes we say a box these days. And inside this box was the rule: don't open it, because inside this box was all kinds of nasty little things. This woman was named Pandora. And one day, out of curiosity, she opened the jar to see what was in it. And she wasn't supposed to, but when she did, she released into the world all of the terrible things like disease and death and all the other evils, but she wasn't quick enough to slam the lid shut before they had all escaped. But at the bottom of the jar, there remained one last evil, a slow-moving curse, more evil and considered worse than all of the other diseases and evils that had escaped into the world. And that curse was called hope. So if we really want to understand hope in the days of Jesus, if you're taking notes, your first note is this: worldly hope is considered a curse. The ancient Greeks considered hope to be worse than all of the other evils of the world. But why? Even Nietzsche wrote, in reality, it is the worst of all evils because it prolongs the torments of man. What does that mean exactly? Well, to give an example, imagine yourself sitting in your own little castle with your own little pile of gold and find yourself surrounded on all sides. There's no foreseeable way out and you're going to die. They're going to take your gold, so what do? Well, if we examine the situation rationally and we use the virtue of prudence, what we come to is the solution is to burn the house down around us. Because we're going to die anyway, so we kill ourselves, destroy our gold, and destroy the castle, so if we can't have it, they can't have it either. That's the prudent thing to do. Why prolong our suffering? Hope would say, just hold out a little bit longer. Well, then they're going to capture you. Then they're going to torture you. Then you get to watch them take your gold. So hope was considered a curse. What is worth waiting for? How we look at hope determines if hope is a gift or a curse in our life. And in fact, the Greek word for hope is based upon the idea in English where we get the word delusion. Worldly hope on its own is a feel-good delusion without substance, and it's important that we know what we mean when we say hope. When we say, I hope you get better, or I hope you feel better, do those words mean anything? Or in the end, are they emptiness to pass along a general feeling of sympathy? Because hope must be based on something substantial to be really worth anything in the end. As it said, I hope things get better in the future. Well, what does that mean? The subject of worldly hope is things. Things, random. They might randomly get better. And the object of our hope is the future. Well, give it enough time, and maybe the things will get better. So secondly, on the other hand, biblical hope has a grounding, and it's grounded in God, if you're taking notes. You see, when the church began to speak about this new kind of hope that was being talked about, that was different than the old ideas of hope. There wasn't even a word in the language that they could use to describe it. So they used the old ancient word, and they hijacked it. The ancient Greek word was the word elpis, which traditionally was about the expectation. We said it's translated English as delusion. But their idea was the word elpis was about the expectation of evil or bad things to happen. It was about deceptive expectations. So what we see, or that we kind of see, is that the early church does what it does good, and it redeems a word, and it makes it good. It restores it. It gives it new meaning. So much so that when we say hope today around the globe, it's considered a good thing. It's no longer considered simply a curse, but it very much can still be a curse if it's not properly grounded. We read earlier Romans 15:13, which says, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit." Where's the basis of hope, and where does it get its source? It is from God himself. He is the God of hope. It is part of who he is his nature. He is the God of love. He is the God of justice, but he is a God of hope. So hope, as we see it, is not based on a generalized belief, but on the very presence and person of God. Just like we said last week, that our faith has to be based on the person of who God is. We trust that God can and will act according to who his nature is and his will. For hope to be good, it must be founded in something trustworthy that we can anchor it in. And if we've ever wondered if you've ever wondered, this is where Bible study comes in very much importance. When we know our Bible stories, telling of our own stories of faith to one another, this is where these things really come important in our life. Because one of the basics we need to build is our understanding of who God is and how God works. And so why do we teach these Bible stories to children? Because we ground them, we anchor them, we place their foundation in understanding not just words of who God is, but how he works, and give them examples. We need real examples we can hold on to. We want them to have this foundation to look upon during hard times, and says, this is how God has shown up in the past, and this is why I can trust God to show up in the future. Hebrews 11:1, which we also read last week, says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, and the conviction of things not seen." So hope's basis is within our faith, but also our faith is part of hope. They work together hand in hand. It is because of our faith we can be assured or confident of things that we are hoped for. Our hope is based in our faith. And as our faith in God grows, so then does our hope grow. Life is going to come at you. The rain, as it says, is going to fall on the righteous and the unrighteous. Hard times are going to happen. Good things happen to evil people, and bad things happen to those who consider them to be good people. It happens. Unfairness, betrayal, and those parade of problems happen in our life. And sometimes there's just seasons that we feel very much like Job and what happens to him in the Bible, where everything seems to go wrong all at once. And even, as happened to him, even his friends add insult to injury. But this is when hope really kicks in. Like that backup generator when all the normal power has gone out and there's nothing left. As we quoted G.K. Chesterton last week, quote him again this week. Hope means hoping when things are hopeless, or it is no virtue at all. As long as it matters, and there's still that little bit of hope, or as he says, as long as things matter and are really hopeful, hope is mere flattery or platitude. It is only when everything is hopeless that hope begins to be a strength. That's one of the things and one of those writings that changed my entire understanding of this concept of hope. Going back to Romans 15:13, we see that it's our trusting in him that allows our hope to overflow. Now, there's a lot more in that verse than we have time for this morning, but I want you to notice two words that are there: joy and peace. And those are also words we use at Christmas time quite often, which we might just come back to next week. So what's really the use of hope? I think we have a general idea of how real hope can be beneficial in our lives, but what does it look like? In the old Christmas carol, O Little Town of Bethlehem, which we've probably sung since childhood, we've been reciting these words. But sit on them a minute. Yet in the dark streets shineth the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all the years are found in thee tonight. You see, we spoke about fear last week and how faith helps conquer our fears and how important it is. And there's a biblical truth we see, and it's that hope gives light amidst dark times. In Isaiah 9, written about 300 years before the birth of Jesus, it contains over 400 prophecies. There's over 450 prophecies in the Old Testament given to us, given to the ancient Jews to provide hope. That there is a plan, and God is executing that plan. It's trusting that He is on the throne and understanding that even when times are the darkest, He's still in control. Isaiah 9 begins by saying that there's no more gloom for those who are in distress. It says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. So our Christmas carol from today that we mentioned, O come, Emmanuel, one of the verses says this: O come, thou dayspring, from on high, and cheer us by thy drawing nigh. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and death's dark shadows put to flight. Our third note, if we're taking notes, is this, is that biblical hope disperses the darkness. It has the power to drive that darkness that gets within our heart and drive it back out. Isaiah's reference to Israel's past, when he's talking through Isaiah 9, is about times of darkness. And what were those times of darkness? They were living in oppression when they saw no end to their suffering. There was no way out. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. It was hopelessness. It was despair. It was distress. It was ongoing physical pain. It says literally that they're carrying heavy weight upon their shoulder. It was suffering day in and day out. It was emotional pain from hurt and loss. It was oppressive. But what we read is God showed up when God was supposed to show up. He had a plan. It doesn't mean that God showed up when they wanted him to show up and when we always want him to show up, but he has a plan and he's walking with us and it has a purpose. He showed up at the right time for the right purpose. Hope isn't about predicting what God's going to do with certainty. It's not about not ever knowing if he's going to show up. It's right smack dab in the middle there. Hope is saying, I don't know the future, but I know God and his character. And I know what he does. So it's going back to that castle that we're sitting in. And we're surrounded completely by enemies. We're sitting with our pot of gold. But instead of saying, let's burn the house down around us, what hope does when it's based and grounded upon God, it says this: you don't know what God's going to do 5 minutes from now. Hold on. You don't know. I remember a few years back when Shannon was having the start of a hip issue she was having, and her back went out. And she was running her own business at the house, and suddenly from one moment to the next minute, we found ourselves very much in the situation where there was going to be no income coming in to pay the bills. Now, I was working at a church, but I had given up my entire paycheck because hers was paying all the bills. So we were just stuck in a situation. And this feeling of hopelessness came. And even worse than that is that when it happened, we ended up at the hospital. And they looked quite confused at what to do as well. because they had tried to give pain meds and she was unable to get up out of bed. And they would give another pain med and unable to get out of bed. And I remember walking the streets of the hallways of the hospital and walking down into finding that there was a chapel and sitting down there for a minute and feeling completely helpless and hopeless and just sitting down and crying because I didn't know what to do. I felt completely unable to help her and take away the pain. I felt unable to do anything to help the situation. And after reminding myself that God was still there, he was still in charge, and I didn't know how, I knew that he would show up in some way. I got up and walked back. And about the time that I got back to the room, there was one last final med they were giving her. They're saying, well, if this doesn't work, there is nothing else. Well, a few minutes went by and she was able to sit up. A few minutes later, we were able to get back to the car. And then to get us back going again. And I didn't know how things were going to happen. There was time of recovery that took. And so I took jobs with Amazon delivering packages, Uber doing drives, but it made it last. It covered that gap and got us through. We didn't know if it was going to be a long-term issue, if it would get better. But that's sometimes the things that life throws at us, these unexpected journeys when things look completely hopeless. I didn't know how God would show up, but I knew who God was and his character. And that's why we trust as we wait. And that was one of very many situations that's happened in our life, from hurricanes coming and our house almost being flooded and being awake and drenched in water for 3 or 4 days straight, just trying to hold back the flood water from going inside the house. But if God is the subject of our hope, then our object of our hope is what we hope God will do. So there's 3 things I want you to write down briefly this morning. The first one is provision. We know that God's going to take care of us. We always don't know how. But when we are faithful as well, God provides as well for us. It doesn't always look like the way we want it to look, but it happens. We've had Christmases where, I remember Christmas many years back when somebody decided to empty our entire bank account a few days before Christmas. No Christmas dinner, very few presents. And within a few days we had a return check that popped into the mail. We had a couple gift cards that people had sent us, and that got us through. Sometimes there's provision. The second one is protection. We see in Scripture that God says that he will be with us, that he goes before us to prepare the way and behind us to shield our escape. We know that story of Moses in Egypt standing at the Red Sea. The third one is prospect. We know that it isn't over, that our story isn't over, and that even if this life ends, that there's still a bright future in the next. These are the objects of our hope. God is the subject. So as we close, I want to share with you a painting from the 1880s by George Frederick Watts. Classically in art, hope is symbolized actually as an anchor, but there is a picture of hope in this painting. She is sitting and she is blind. Hope is seated on a globe and she's playing a lyre, and all but one string is broken. And she bends her head down so she can just faintly hear the music. And the overall atmosphere of the painting is sadness and desolation. And we look at this painting, we wonder if it would be better if it was titled Hopelessness or Despair. But take note, she's damaged but not destroyed. There's still this very quiet song that only she can hear by that one string that's left holding on. But why is hope blindfolded? Because she sees with the eyes of her heart what the physical eyes cannot yet perceive. We can't always see what God's going to do in the days ahead. But she hears a song that others cannot hear, and she holds on. In Luke 2, we find Mary and Joseph in a very rough spot than we often consider. They were made to leave home and travel to Bethlehem for a government census, very pregnant, arriving and finding no place to stay. And it was a very high possibility that it wasn't a barn that they stayed in, but a crowded cave in the hillside with lots of other people and animals, and no other place to lay your child but a feeding trough, wrapping him in some unusual cloth. And the term that was actually used in Luke is the same term that's used to describe a burial cloth. Once again, giving us a hint of what was to come. Within a few years, they're having to flee their country because of a mass genocide meant to try to kill their child. And as we look at the story, we see good because it's evident because of what happens and the good that comes out of it. But for them, all they had in that moment was hope. And it's easy to miss hope amidst suffering and troubles in our life. Because hope is something that's very, very, very easy to miss if we're not looking for it. And the same thing with this painting, there's something very, very easy to miss. And if you saw that first painting, you probably missed that one little speck up in the top. And that's the star of hope. It's a small but dim star that is shining. Hope is like a small dim star that we don't often see at first. We often miss, but it's there if we look for it. If it's grounded in the right thing. For Mary and Joseph, it was real life, it was real pain, it was real anguish, and real trusting that God would get them through, that the God of hope would get them through and continue his plan. And we know this was leading to the greatest single event in human history, which also was the single greatest tragedy in human history, but for the greatest good, which was the cross. Our hope was based in the fulfillment of what would happen at the cross and him rising again. Our hope is knowing that according to Romans 8, that God works all things together for good for those who love him. And so a final Christmas carol to quote as we close. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. May you find your hope again this Christmas. Let's close with prayer.